At NCS, we solve technology problems where others can't. Challenge us. Search NCS Australia.
We all know how a neighbour with irksome habits can drive us to distraction. Maybe their leaf blower is their best friend, or they blast their music at all hours. But what if your neighbour is Gina Rinehart, Australia's richest woman, and you're on a disability pension? I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris, and you're listening to the Morning Edition from The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Today, investigative reporter Lucy Macken on why the Supreme Court is hearing a case involving feral goats and a 12-kilometre fence, and why each woman won't call off the fight. Welcome, Lucy, to the Morning Edition.
Hi, Sam.
You know I've had you in my sights to have you on for so long because you have so many great yarns. So let's get into it. I mean, before we get into the dispute over the fence, which is going before the New South Wales Supreme Court as we record this, can you just start off by telling us a little bit about where these properties are located and, why this is such rich cattle country? Because this is not exactly the setting for your run-of-the-mill neighbourly fence stoush.
No, it certainly isn't. For starters, it's a fence between two farms, so this is not a housing thing. This is a major farming fence dispute. The main farm is Gina Rinehart's vast Wagyu beef operation, Sundown Valley, which she bought in 2018, by the way, for what land titles indicate is about $100 million. And she's since expanded to cover about 42,000 hectares across the northern tablelands. I should add that Sundown Valley surrounds a small 157-hectare property known as Alawa, and that's owned by Kathy Pope. There's also another property next door to Kathy Pope, Alawa 2, and that's also involved in the proceedings. So basically you've got this small pocket of 630 hectares surrounded by the Gina Rinehart operation, and that is the fence boundary that is in dispute. It's a David and Goliath stoush of major proportions.
Okay, so can you just tell us how you actually came across this story? I mean, we all love hearing about a bit of a neighbourly stoush, I think, because we can relate, right? It's really easy to get ticked off by the habits of those that we sometimes live uncomfortably close to. But of course, this one, like you say, involves Australia's richest person. She is worth an estimated $38 billion, as you've pointed out in your piece. And of course, we're dealing with thousands of acres of land. So how did you stumble on this, Lucy?
Well, look, Kathy Pope is suing Gina Rinehart personally. So when Georgina Hope Rinehart, as she is formerly known, name comes up on the court lists, it's inevitable that somebody is going to pick it up, and I was there, right? Kathy Pope, however, is not a familiar name, and turns out there are quite a few Kathy Popes in Australia. But once I had tracked her down, the story behind these proceedings became a little bit more apparent. Kathy Pope claims, and I should add this is a disputed claim by Rinehart's office, she claims that she's lost about 800 animals over the years because of the dilapidated state of the fence that separates their two farms. She has cattle, sheep, goats, wild deer, some pretty fancy dogs, Maremma, guardian dogs. And without the proper fencing, she keeps losing her animals. Gina Rinehart's property is also known to have animals cross over, the boundary. And there are reports, from her side of the fence, they've had issues with goats and pigs digging under the fence and the need to treat Kathy's animals for disease. So at the heart of it, Kathy Pope says in 2019, it was a year after Gina Rinehart bought the farm next door, there were negotiations to share the cost of fencing. Just what was agreed, of course, who is liable for what, and whether there was any agreement in the first place is what's before the courts now.
Okay, so where did everything go wrong? Because you had in your piece that when Kathy Pope first found out that Gina Rinehart's farm was going to be next to hers, she was really excited. She was something of a fan. And at least according to Kathy, they had come to a verbal agreement about the fence. So what happened?
Yeah, no, and that is, I've got to add, that is Kathy Pope's claim. Gina Rinehart's, because it's a matter before the courts, Gina Rinehart's office have declined to issue any statement. But she did say that she offered to pay for the materials as long as Rinehart's management team would cover the labour and contribute to the use of any machinery and materials that they had on site. So it was a sort of form of going halves in a way. And while that's sort of disputed, I do also know that Cathy Pope did go about organising finance to fund her part of things, because she's got a loan on title from the Rural Assistance Authority taken out in 2021 to the tune of $100,000. And that, debt remains lodged on the title. As for the total cost of what this is, I mean, costs haven't gone down in the years since. But at the time, Cathy Pope claimed that they were trying to do the fence, that if she borrowed $100,000, threw in $20,000 of her own, that would cover about half of it. So we're looking at about $250,000 for a fence. And that's depending on the range of factors like the height, the type, the land that it's got to cover, things like that. I should add that complicating this whole drama is the fact that Cathy Pope doesn't just want her place fenced. She wants it also to fence the neighbour's place next door. Now, she's had a long-standing agreement with her friend Mary Kakarubis, who owns the farms next door, that she can adjust all her animals on Mary's farm as well, taking the total farmland that she's got access to about 630 hectares. But in exchange, she needs to maintain the fences, maintain the tracks and all that sort of stuff. And so for that reason, it's a situation that suited both women well. And so Mary Kakarubis has joined with Cathy Pope as a second plaintiff in the proceedings against Gina Rinehart. I should add that neither of the women have any legal representation in this matter against Gina.
Which I guess feeds into this, David and Goliath sort of narrative, right? Because we've spoken about Gina Rinehart's billions, and Cathy Pope, I believe, is a disability pensioner and a hobby farmer. So very, very different access that they've got, I guess, to help in this matter. So tell us where it all went wrong, though, because as you've written, some fencing had been built. So the fencing, it started, and I guess about 800 meters, I think, of exclusion fencing was put down, I think in about 2022. What happened? Because then it stopped.
Yeah, exactly. And that time, Cathy says that she got $25,000 in financial contributions from Hancock Prospecting towards it. Everything was going along tickety-boo, according to Cathy. And then work stopped. At the time, one of the contractors involved in the fencing was arrested on arson charges in the town of Uralla nearby, and has since been sentenced and found guilty and sentenced for that. Now, somehow or other, I think he was involved in the fencing. It didn't have anything to do with the dispute, but it was timed at the time when everything ground to a halt. Now, of course, the problem is this is all Cathy's say-so. Gina's lawyers, they haven't come in and said that there was any agreement either way, or if there wasn't. And, of course, it was, as Cathy said, a verbal agreement. So whether that holds as well, which, that verbal agreements do hold, but that is all yet to be tested.
Does Gina dispute that there was a verbal agreement, or she's just made no statement on that grounds yet?
They have disputed all of Cathy Pope's claims that I put to them, but then it said that we won't comment any further because it's a matter for the courts. But the fact that work stopped in 2022 and Cathy Pope's failed to get work started again, multiple approaches, calling every senior executive, it seems, in the, Hancock Prospecting and Hancock, and in the farming management team, with no success. That is what has basically culminated in her launching legal proceedings in the Supreme Court now.
And so, we had a conversation before we started recording, because on the face of it, it seems like this David versus Goliath battle, a deeply unequal struggle. One side, you've got Australia's richest person, with sophisticated lawyers on speed dial. And, on the other side, you've got a hobby farmer, a disability pensioner who at the moment can't afford legal representation. So is it a bit more complicated than that, or is it really simple?
No, look, it is, is it a matter of the court just enforcing a simple fencing dispute? The Dividing Fences Act, and I'll paraphrase it here if you don't mind. Basically when an old or broken fence is replaced, the cost is shared by you and your neighbour, like for like, right? If you want extra finishes, double capped, folded, painted, bordered, and it wasn't there before, then you cop the extra cost, right? But in this case, the question is Cathy Pope liable for the costs of the fence that needs to be repaired? Or is Gina Rinehart? If so, what type of fence is required? And bearing in mind that at the time Cathy Pope claims she started negotiating, it was an estimated $250,000, right? And 5 years later, that will be a bigger cost. I don't know how Cathy Pope would afford that. I'm sure she might be able to, but if you can't afford a lawyer, that's a lot of fence. And then there's also the question of whether this verbal agreement in 2019, if there was one, is that enforceable? And if so, it might raise the issue of a promissory estoppel, whereby a promise is enforced without the need for a formal contract, provided one side relied on that promise as like a sort of shield, when the other party breaks a promise, or whether that verbal agreement, was never actually agreed. And, obviously behind it all are two fairly fraught pair of neighbours.
After the break.
And there have been offers to settle on both sides, actually. The Rinehart side haven't disclosed their settlement offers, but Cathy Pope did say that she'd made a few offers. Initially, she said she just wanted to get the fence around her and her neighbour's property, where she had just property fixed. But since then, the offers have escalated, and the last one, apparently, she tells me, included about $10 million worth of costs and damages.
And how fraught? I mean, my understanding is that both have, I guess, experienced lawsuits of their own on each side, right? I mean, is
Yes.
it fair to say that perhaps both have, if not a litigious nature, then they have been involved in lawsuits, I guess?
Yeah. Look, Cathy Pope described herself to me in the very first moments that I spoke to her on the phone. She said, I am the sort of person who, when I see any sort of wrong against me, I can't let it go. And it causes me all sorts of problems in my life. And I have never forgotten those words, because it is causing all sorts of problems in her life, and she doesn't have the means to fight it. But she's doing so. I really feel for her. Whether she's right or in the wrong here, I do feel for her.
Okay, but it has to be asked. I mean, Gina Rinehart is worth an estimated $38 billion. So why would she just not settle outside of court, get the fencing done so everyone can just move on with their lives? Yeah, why not?
Yeah. And there have been offers to settle on both sides, actually. The Rinehart side haven't disclosed their settlement offers, but Cathy Pope did say that she'd made a few offers. Initially, she said she just wanted to get the fence around her and her neighbour's property, where she had just property fixed. But since then, the offers have escalated, and the last one, apparently, she tells me, included about $10 million worth of costs and damages, as well as having 200 hectares of land, of Rinehart land, surrounding, that is nearest to Cathy Pope's house, transferred into Cathy Pope's ownership. So, is that outrageous? It sounds pretty bold. I can't help, but wonder if the damage that's been done is that high. Maybe I'm wrong. And it was rejected. So, I don't think Rinehart was having a moment of it. But at the end of the day, Cathy felt like she had no other option than to go to court. And for now, as she's, I think I quoted her on this, she's left paying off for a loan for a fence that isn't there, and still dealing with the issue of stock coming and going over the boundary.
Okay, and on the other side, I do have to ask, it's one thing to say, okay, shouldn't Gina just pay up? But is it perhaps arguable that Cathy Pope gives as good as she gets, and that perhaps she would have been better off just taking one of Hancock Prospecting's offers to settle? Like, do we know why Cathy is persisting? I mean, I know that in your piece, she mentioned something about, adhering to a farmer's code. So maybe you can begin by telling us, what she meant by that. She feels like Gina Rinehart has breached some sort of social norm amongst farmers.
Well, I think what her point is that in the country, the neighbours chip in and help each other. And I'm sure that, people lean into Gina Rinehart and say, can you help out your neighbours here, there and everywhere? And I'm sure that happens. And certainly, there is obviously that going on. There are reports from Hancock Agriculture that some of Cathy Pope's animals have been treated for disease and then returned. There's also Cathy Pope's contention that animals have gone missing. She blames, the lost fence and all this sort of stuff. I mean, there has been a bit of give and take. But I think as Cathy Pope's, calls for this fence work to be recommenced that started, in 2021 and to get work done, has got louder and louder. It hasn't been received positively. Let's just say that.
To say the least. Now, I know
To say
that,
the least.
we're not going to find out more until March 5th, which I believe is when we're going to find out whether, I guess the court is even willing for this case to go forward.
That's right, yeah.
But just to wrap up, Lucy, from your research into this dispute, does it seem like there's one party that's wronged more than the other? Or perhaps do we just have two litigious neighbours, neither of whom wants to sort of give in to the other side?
I think the latter, actually. Both of them are not shy of a court fight. And that's, certainly in Gina Rinehart's case, that's documented. And Cathy Pope has certainly fronted up for quite a few court cases of her own. Self-represented too in the latest one. Without knowing the actual settlement offers and the terms of the agreements previously, I'm not going to hazard a guess on either side. I will leave that to Justice Hammerschlag. But he did, when it came up before him in court, it was only a mention, a quick directions, 5-minute matter. Cathy wasn't in the courtroom. She was, remotely tuning into the court material. There were about half a dozen lawyers representing Gina Rinehart and her various interests. But it was basically just a chance for the judge to warn Cathy that if the material she had submitted to the court so far was just not going to cut it, and that, it wasn't even vaguely enough to pass for a decent statement of claim. And he gave her 21 days to file a workable statement of claim, or he would dismiss the case before it had even started. We'll find out on March 5 if the case is going forward from here or if Cathy Pope's lack of legal representation has brought it all undone.
After doing the research, because I know you did speak to Cathy Pope at length.
Yes.
And obviously you've dug into the Defences Act. Who knew there was one? Is there any lesson in this for us, for the listeners?
I don't know, but I did sit in court today and I looked across at the half a dozen senior counsel and lawyers and so forth, and they were just the ones in the room and the media minders and all of that. And I did wonder, for the cost of this 5-minute appearance, maybe you just fence the whole place.
Just fence it. At whose cost, Lucy Macken?
Okay.
That's right, the line.
As long as I'm not paying for it, whatever.
Well, Lucy, you always have really interesting yarns, so thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Today's episode was produced by Josh Towers. Our executive producer is Tammy Mills, and our podcasts are overseen by Lisa Muxworthy and Tom McKendrick. If you like our show, follow The Morning Edition and leave a review for us on Apple or Spotify. Thanks for listening.